And we've got no executive members.
No.
And Jackie Brockway's not here. Okay, let's just, I mean, I'm not going to introduce it, so we welcome him if he's not here.
Check with his office first. Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. My name is Councillor Robert Parker and I'm Chair of the Board. Welcome to all members here today. Also to officers attending both here in the Council Chamber and some attending on Teams. The video feed of this meeting is being broadcast via the County Council's website, and I'd like to welcome members of the press and public who may be watching or listening in to our meeting today. We may have the attendance of a couple of executive members, but I'm not sure at the moment. Certainly Councillor Hill and Councillor Boothroyd indicated they may attend, and in their place, if they're not here, Councillor Whittington may attend and Councillor Hilton Spratt may attend. Okay. If I could welcome also Andrew Crookham, Executive Director Resources, attending in the Council Chamber. I just want to begin, as I normally do with and other people do, with the health and safety announcement. There's no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the Council Chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park. We then need to wait until we get further instructions. Can I remind everyone to ensure that mobile phones and devices are on silent? Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you're on your microphone? Otherwise, the officers attending the meeting via Teams and also members of the press and public listening in won't be able to hear you. Please also be aware the final point is that microphones are very sensitive and can pick up any noise nearby when switched on. Okay? If you want to ask a question during the course of the meeting, please raise your hand as normal. Okay. That's that then. So, apologies for absence and replacement members. Item 1. Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Adams, Brockway and Strengle, Alex Sayer, Debbie Barnes, and we also have Councillor Wright in attendance as a replacement for Councillor Strengle.
Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Wright. First meeting of OSMB. Hope you enjoy it. Item 2, declarations of members' interest. Members, I've just simply reminded they only need to declare any relevant interest which is not already been declared on your declaration of pecuniary interest forms. Does anybody have an interest in any item on the agenda? No. Thanks. Okay. So if we move to the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of August, this is before us today for you to confirm and I to sign the minutes from the meeting as a correct record. So in terms of accuracy, if we turn to page 5, could we have a look and see if there's anything you want to say about anything on on page 5? If not, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, and page 16. And then finally, page 17. Okay? So, is it agreed that I should sign these as a true record? Do I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposed by Councillor Pepper and seconded by Councillor Kendrick. Okay. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you. Fine. Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Dilks. Yes. So, thank you. That's it. The minutes are agreed. Okay. Item 4 on the agenda is announcements by the Chair, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. So it looks as though it's down to me and Andrew in the absence of any Executive Councillors. On behalf of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, I attended the Executive on the 7th of September and presented the Board's comments on the Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report. On the Revenue Budget Report, I highlighted our recognition of the cost pressures in relation to the capital programme caused by, first of all, supply issues, labour shortages and increased costs. The Executive acknowledged that labour shortages in particular were likely to result in some major pressures for the Council, and there was a need to examine what mitigating circumstances there were and if the Council would need to do some things differently. A potential risk identified by the Executive for the Council was the shortage of HGV drivers. So we were noticing it back in August, who also doubled up as gritter drivers during the winter. And that's a particular problem for us. I also highlighted our interest in further examining the forecasted overspend in fire and rescue due to long-term sickness. The Chief Executive advised that she had agreed for more detailed work to be carried out in relation to sickness absences and to examine how fire and rescue could be supported to reduce its sickness absence. Finally, I need to refer to the SIPFA Code of Practice for Treasury Management, which is adopted in the financial regulations in the Council's constitution. It's recommended that all those involved in treasury management, that's us, are suitably trained. So treasury management training is being arranged for members of the board for November, and we'll be looking at sending out an appointment shortly. Okay? Fine. Okay, so moving on to Executive Councillor announcements. I don't Councillor Hill has joined us yet. Yes, just in time. Any announcements, Martin?
No, I don't think so this morning, thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Boothroyd. Seen him, didn't see him in your office or about, Martin? No? Okay. So, none. Thank you. Chief Officer's announcements. Andrew, have you got anything to say?
Nothing to report, thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, fine, thank you. That deals with item 4 then. Okay, moving on to item 5, consideration of call-ins. Emily, are there any call-ins to consider?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 6, consideration of councillors' calls for action.
None received.
Again, Emily, no.
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 7, update on IMT services project portfolio. This item sets out how we're doing on projects being commissioned through IMT. I'd like to welcome down the line Donna Fryer, Head of Portfolio and Resources, who is attending today via Teams to present the report. John Wickens, Assistant Director in IMT, is also in attendance via Teams to help answer any questions. So, over to you, Donna.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we've put together again a report which gives you a snapshot in time of our IMT portfolio of projects. It's something that we have done a few times now. So this one builds upon the last report, which was taken in May. The key points from this report really is to note are that the portfolio is performing well. There's something just in the part 2, which is on page 19, which shows a blip of the KPI 11, which is the number of milestones met within a month. There was a one result which actually was below where we would hope it would be, but actually there was a mitigating circumstance that actually within that particular month there was only 4 milestones that were due. There was 1 milestone missed, which obviously equated to 25%. Because of that, we actually accepted that as a mitigation against that. I'm pleased to say that the latest KPI 11 and the majority of those up to there have actually gone back to 100%. So that does show that performance and demonstrate that too. I think the other key thing that we've reported, and there's historical data in there, is around the number of projects which are reporting as being red, green or amber. I'm pleased to report for one of the a few times that we actually have no projects this time which are reporting as red. We have one project which is reporting as amber, which is to do with legal services and the replacement or the move to a new system for their case management. That particular project is sitting at amber, although actually is very much on the cusp of going back to green. The issues that were seen in that project have actually been analysed, and we have a plan now in place to bring those back online. So they will be going back to a green compliance very shortly. In terms of the red status, in the past we've reported quite a number of times the telephony project, IMT 117. That I'm pleased to report that that project is now no longer red and has actually moved back to a green status. It has now got a plan in place and will be looking to deliver that upgrade during this year. So we're in a good place, and actually just really to report that Serco have performed well. We do have, as we go back into kind of normal running, coming out of recovery of COVID-19, there is an increase in the activity in projects, but at the moment it's performing well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions anybody wants to ask Donna? Yeah, Councillor Hill.
It's not a question, Chairman, but as Councillor Betroy is not here, I think there is a concern about this case management system, which legal have been waiting for some time. So I think it would be helpful if the committee were just to ask some more progress on the detail of when this will be in place.
Fine, thank you. Donna, you heard what Councillor Hill had to say.
I did indeed. Yes, so the plan that's been put in place at the moment is looking at moving them to their new system. There was some miscommunications around whether that system would work on their existing build of their computers. It actually will. So that can actually now progress. We are supporting actively now the testing of that system to make sure it does exactly what they need it to do. With a view to then moving them over to the modern desktop management, which is another project we've got in there, which will bring them onto 365, so Microsoft 365, sorry, and bring them in line, and that should be complete again during this calendar year.
You said it should be completed by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah.
When was the target? What was the target date before?
They were hoping to actually have their system up and running and closed by the end of November. So we've got a little bit of extension upon that. I can go back and find out more detail about that and can report that back if that would be appropriate.
That would be good. Can you circulate a paper to members of OSMB and to Councillor Hill?
Yeah, I can do that.
Can you tell us if there's anything that you are concerned about that is further down the track, maybe?
I think in terms of looking further down the track, I think we have got a number of projects, and there is going to be quite a lot of activity out in there. We need to be looking at that, and obviously we are looking at what that volume of work might look like, and making sure that we're resourced for that. And as we're obviously starting to work up towards the end of Serco contract, etc., we're obviously looking at that too. So we're working and looking at the strategy. John, you might be better placed to speak about that.
At the moment, the paper that we've received, and John and I have discussed this in the past, is concentrated on these key performance indicators.
Yeah.
As we move down the track, new schemes, as you say, are being developed. But this committee would be particularly interested in early warnings about things that may, I'm not saying go wrong, but start to give some cause for concern. In other words, for example, the end of the Serco contract is a major one, for example. Is there any way, what ways could you think of should we say, keeping us up to date about potential problems that may be coming down the line?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I think with regards to OSMB, we've always sort of carved IMT up into different elements of the actual service because it can become quite a large subject to cover in one meeting. And so in terms of the future service arrangements, there is, of course, the CSSR programme. Papers are moving in the new year towards executive papers, and of course those will also come through OSMB. So they're very much concerned about that future view of the service post the Serco contract. You have started to, you've had one report in recent months from Alison Kapitha-Nasis, who reports on the sort of the day-to-day break-fix service. Today you've had Donna's report on the operation of the portfolio, so the delivery of the projects against the dates agreed between the commissioning officer, or sometimes the officer governing on behalf of the commissioning officer, and the organisations delivering the project. So that's not to say dates don't change in the proper course of programme management, the KPIs tend to reflect more where there's any disagreement or tensions in the running of the project. So where the project is redesigned, takes on additional scope, sometimes takes things out of scope, dates are amended and changed to deal with the resources available, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, finally, and much less regularly, you have the overarching strategy. So there is a strategy in draft at the moment being reviewed by key stakeholders. And that will be socialised more widely very soon. But from that strategy, it will imply the kinds of work patterns, workloads and projects that we'll be delivering in the coming few years. I think, but perhaps one thing we should consider, Mr. Chairman, is looking at not just the sort of the mechanics of project management, but also that relationship between the design goals, what the project was hoping to achieve, and the business benefits realisation. And we are sort of doing some work to sort of more, record these things well. It does take time because it takes a while after a project has closed to realise the benefits sometimes. Welcome to have discussions in the agenda setting meeting as to how we could sort of start to play back that relationship between the purpose of a project and what it seeks to achieve on behalf of the organisation. Does that answer the question to your satisfaction, sir?
Yeah, that sounds fine. Thank you. Anybody want to ask any questions? No. Okay, so the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board invited to note this report, and any comments be passed on to the Executive Councillor for Resources, Communications and Commissioning. So we're passing them on now, Councillor Hill. So could I have an indication that that we can note the report? Yep. Great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Donna, and thank you, John. So Treasury Management. Performance Q1 to 1st of June to the 30th of June 21-22. Treasury Management Activities and Performance. Karen Tong, Treasury Managers attending, and Sue Maycock is also here to help answer any questions. So welcome Karen, welcome Sue. So here on Teams, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. This is the first Treasury Management Performance Quarterly Report for 21-22, which compares performance and activities to the 30th of June against the TM strategy for 21-22 that was approved by Executive Council for Resources in March 21. I've been asked to keep this presentation relatively short this morning, so I'll just highlight the key points from the report, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. So we'll start with the interest rates, and the graph shown in Appendix A, which is page 47 of the pack, I believe, shows interest rates to date. I've actually put them to sort of when I wrote the report, not finished them off in June, because I'm conscious that we're nearly at Q2 position now. So I've moved them on a bit to show you the full picture. And you can see that interest rates have remained low as forecast in the strategy. and long-term rates are actually at the lowest point of the year so far at the end of August. In Link's interest rate forecast, which is shown at the bottom of page 47, their first increase in short-term base rate was in June 2023. However, recent inflationary pressures have seen markets predict an increase as early as February next year. This has affected long-term rates too, which have increased slightly over the last month. But those rates are still in line with Link's forecast levels for long-term rates. Depending on whether the market is right or not, really depends on whether inflation, the increases in inflation that we've seen are just seen as transitory, or whether they're going to be embedded and debated out on that. And like I say, the markets think it's going to be a permanent problem. Bank of England and don't necessarily, and Link would concur with that. So we'll see on that. Time will tell whether those increases will come sooner rather than later. Cash balances have remained high over the year, but the certainty of cash flows have returned after COVID from last year, I'm pleased to say, and benchmarking has been exceeded by holding less liquidity instruments and having a longer weighted average maturity of 123 days on the investment portfolio. Although annualised return has fallen over the period to 0.3% now, so we're not talking a huge level. The investment activity can be seen in Appendix B of the report on page 53, which will show the picture of what I've just said there. Borrowing activity, which can be seen on Appendix E, which is page 73. You can be seen from this that the borrowing requirement for 21-22 has been estimated to be just under 90 million, following adjustments for rephasing and underspend predictions and so forth. High cash balances in general have allowed us to have higher internal borrowing, which is sort of been risen to about 20-25% of the CFR, which will save on borrowing interest costs by doing that. No external, you'll see on the appendix that no external borrowing has actually been undertaken to date, as long-term rates have been falling. Rephasing may be more in coming over the year, and the actual borrowing requirement may change due to proposed changes in prudential codes by SIPFA, which are due to be published at the end of the year. And I'll elaborate on that, that the SIPFA intend to publish revised prudential codes and treasury management codes at the end of this year, really as a response to local authority overexposure to commercial activity financed by borrowing and the risks that are attributed to that. And the key areas of those changes are going to be sort of a better definition of commercial activity, what constitutes commercial activity, some new prudential indicators to follow, which will tackle proportionality of commercial risk and the level of overall borrowing requirement in general. Also included in these changes are the formalisation of treasury management training requirements by introducing a knowledge and skills framework for those involved in treasury management activity. And the chairman alluded to some training that we're organising for members involved in treasury management now, with this in mind. And this is being organised for some time in November, close to around the next OSMB committee. and really a knowledge and skills framework is trying to sort of formalise skills and to identify, you know, gaps in knowledge and, you know, give opportunity for training where required. So that's the start of that process. So I hope you can all attend that training when it comes round. And in addition to the new codes of practice as well, the government, MHCLG, are also planning to revise the current capital finance framework, again as a measure to curb the excessive commercial investment activity that's been going on by local authorities. So we can expect more reporting and governance, really, to control the risks involved in this activity. And the government will have ability to apply sanctions for deemed inappropriate activity by councils. And this will probably come in for next year, and particularly the next year's budget setting, I would imagine, but we haven't been told yet. And then one final point to mention that, as promised in the strategy, Link have started to review our current policy for minimum revenue provision procedures to ensure it's calculated in the most effective way to minimise costs, if any changes can be made to reduce those costs. And the results of this, they've started this review now and are sort of fact-finding and scoping what we do, and the result of their review will be reported when we have it. So that's all I want to say, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Chair. Not too much. No, I guess the reference that Karen made to all the work that's going on around the codes of practice and what have you, quite, you know, will have quite a sizable impact on the wider sector, albeit not necessarily ourselves, given our our previous historic we haven't followed the routes. We've talked about it previously at previous meetings around investing in hotels, other commercial properties, etc. So whilst it'll have quite a significant impact on the sector, it won't necessarily on ourselves, but I think it's it's a good direction of travel for the sector itself. And clearly, I think we're really keen as well just to plug that training event that we'll have later on in the year as well. Okay. Really important that we ensure that our members are as skilled and knowledgeable about this particular area as possible. So just to get that plug in as well, thank you.
Thank you. That's a nudge to all of us, really. We've got the training programme coming up. Okay. Any questions? Yep. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. You mentioned about the sort of contradictory determination on when interest rates will rise from Link to the Bank of England Monetary Committee to business. Does the council have any provision in place if business, as in the private sector, are proved correct and that interest rates will rise faster than the Monetary Committee expect them to?
Yes. The way the market is reacting and predicting the next interest rate forecast actually provides an opportunity, to be honest, because rates are rising in the market on the back of that now. To take advantage of that opportunity, further sort of long-term investments, will be locked in at this point in time. And if that doesn't turn out to be correct, then that's been a good opportunity. So where the market deviates from what advisors are telling us and so forth, they're the times where opportunities can be made to make some gains over benchmarks. So really, it's just a part of normal treasury management activity to look at the market and assess what we think and take advantage of any deviances in what we're being advised. That's part of what we do day to day.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you. I know Andrew sort of already covered that the change in the code won't actually affect us as an authority too much. What do you think the impact will be for those that have sort of gone down the route, as you say, of hotels, buildings, to in previous time, shall I say, gain money to try and keep their council tax bill low? And is it harmful to, in a professional view, is it harmful for an authority's toolkit, basically, to be able to act in a way it deems necessary to generate funds for its residents without having to rely on council tax? Because obviously, as a very rural authority, you compare the rise, say, and say a very urban authority such as was mentioned, I believe, at full council with Westminster, and then you compare our rise and you compare the two and what the equivalency actually pays for. Is there not a risk that this is, shall I say, over micromanagement from our Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government?
I think what the implications will be is we will have to produce better indicators. The new codes are really focusing on the risks that are being taken in these sort of activities, not necessarily the activities themselves, but you know, to make sure that we're not overexposing by proportion the amount of activity going on, and the risks have been properly assured. So the councils that have been, you know, operating in this way, if they've got good governance and the risks have been covered, and they're not borrowing purely to make a return in activities, that there's some service benefit to what they've been doing, then there'll be no implications at all. It's where the government and SIP really want to crack down on those sort of activities that have been just undertaken purely to make a speculative return, where high risks have been involved, and you know, could expose councils to problems if markets and things change. So that's the activity they're focusing on. So and as such, we cannot now borrow from our Public Works Loan Board for those types of activity. They've already changed their policy for that, so that's already been in place. So yes, it's just trying to tackle the amount, the proportionality of what's gone on and the reasons. But I'm sure if good governance is in place, then yes, it's that practice will carry on, quite rightly, to reduce council tax measures and so forth.
That's okay. Yeah, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. It's on the same subject again, because even at that level, I think it's now oversimplifying, because it's not just about risks and it's not just about the activity. And hopefully when the training comes through, it will reflect how local authorities are operating in this field. Because if you took it on risk, I mean, you could say, who in Luton said, what's the chances of the airport shutting completely? You know, and then the pandemic hit. So the risk rating at that time would no way on earth reflect that was a bad risk when they bought that airport. But with regards to how local authorities are investing, then it should also be looking about not just what they're looking to preserve, as in generating income for the services, but are they taking up market failure in their own local areas? Are they investing in jobs and wealth creation in their own areas, rather than pumping money into another area, which is unfortunately has happened in some places? But I think the training that comes through on that needs to reflect is what is the decision process in there? What is leading to that investment? Because we all know it's about generating the income to pay for services within your local authority, but does it have an added benefit? Or, for instance, are you buying something up that private sector just can't support, but local authority can on a lower rate of return? So I think it's very nice to hear this training, but it's a complex animal, and I think all of that needs to be taken up so that people fully understand why. And it's not just about short-term gain, but why local authorities are actually investing on a commercial basis.
Yes, and indeed, those types of investments are where there's a clear service benefit. There'll be no problem with at all, as long as, you know, the due diligence has been done on projects and so forth. Yes, I agree.
So that can be picked up in November with our training. Anybody else got any questions? I've got one, and that relates to the budget at the end of October. There's much speculation about what the budget that Rishi Sunak will produce is going to do, both in what I'm going to call the wider financial market, but also in the local market, in the sense of to what extent the county council is going to be impacted directly. What take have you got in terms of the issue about how the budget set by the Chancellor, and I realise that tends to be short term, and lots of the stuff that we've talked about or you've talked about today is in the long term, but to what extent could our finances be affected given what you're hearing in the financial markets about the likelihood of the budget at the end of October?
I think I'll pass that one on to Andrew, if I may, about the finances. Really consider that.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, and I'm not sure if Councillor Hill might want to sort of. All right, sorry, apologies. Yeah, a lot of uncertainty about what's coming down the line. What we know is that we think it's going to be a 3-year spending review period. There is a potential that we may receive settlement figures for those 3 years as well, which is something that we've not had the benefit of for the previous 2 or 3 years since we had that settled period, 2016 through 2019, I think it was. Though, albeit we expect that to be a very narrow focus, particularly just predominantly around our core funding. There is the potential that we've heard, and I'm not sure if Councillor Hill might want to elaborate on what on that, possibly around there might be some expected efficiencies within that settlement figure, whether that's real or absolute terms over the 3-year period. Again, we don't know. We've recently heard the announcements about social care funding, or the actual side of the reform around the DILNOT reforms, and we're given to understand as well that there are potential flexibilities around adult care precepts. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the system around that. We know next year down the line, there's the potential around business rates resets as well, and obviously we rely quite heavily on that business rates income in our budget. Albeit we do know that we think that the fairer funding review, the whole issue of distribution, is off the table at the moment, albeit that might come back on during the period as well. So a lot of moving variable parts with a lot of uncertainty, because they're all big figures for us.
Okay.
That's okay.
Thanks. Anything you can add from your LGA position, Martin?
Not the LGA. CCN, I do know that, obviously, as Andrew said, it's going to be a tough settlement. I think that's been told to MPs already, so I don't think we are in, because local government, or the Levelling Up department, or whatever it's called now, is not a protected department. I think it's pretty fair guess that I think savings will be expected. There will be some, rumour is there will be flexibility around the social care precept again, and potentially flexibility around spreading it over a number of years. So I think, as Andrew said, that one of the major uncertainties is how the adult care announcements are going to impact on local governments, and certainly there will be pressure on the government to make sure that the current pressures that the local government holds are recognised in the statement. Maybe some, obviously we currently have the Better Care Fund, so one hopes that will continue, but also will it be also further bolstered in terms of the additional amount of money, because the money that was announced for local government was specifically for setting up the new regime of when the cap comes in, and I think that's what it's supposed to be for, and we are told that the money which is currently being given to the NHS will then be given to local government at a later date. Some scepticism about that, I think, but there is also talk of it being enshrined in legislation, so we shall see about that. And the other issue, which is particularly important for rural counties, is pressure to reinstate the cut in highways maintenance, which we suffered this year, and I know certainly the CCN, as it affects rural counties particularly badly, including us, of course, really, you know, if we've got to endure a tough settlement, so be it. But really, that highways funding must be put back, because as we all know, those of us who stood for election, it is the #1 issue that the public want out there. So it's going to be, I think, going to be an interesting sort of situation, but we'll just have to wait and see what the announcements are in terms of the broad announcements, and hopefully we'll get a detailed settlement a little bit before Christmas, which would be very helpful. I don't think there's anything else I've got to add, Chairman.
Okay. Anything anybody else wants to ask? Yes, Tom. Of course.
Sorry, Chairman, you're just going to get sick of my voice. Going back on what Andrew and Councillor Hill mentioned, do we have anything firm on fairer funding? Because I know, even before my time here, this has been lobbied for a very long time, and it's all very well and good with governments having platitudes and making promises, but we need some action on this now, especially if we are going to have a hard settlement. We need the funding to be more fairly distributed, because at the minute it's fairly obvious from the Rural Services Network, and this was a couple of years ago I saw this information, so it was out of date, but it was almost 2 to 3 times as much reliance in a rural authority was on council tax for less services, which is totally not fair and not sustainable for our residents. So is there any update on that at all? You may not be able to answer that, and I apologise to both of you if you can't.
Yeah, we're moving a bit away from Treasury management, but okay.
Yeah, the update is that the rumour is that the government is looking for stability, which translates into, if it's a 3-year settlement, looks like the fairer funding has been pushed back yet again. And, you know, there is a frustration, because we all know we've been on this sort of campaign for some time, so it will be extremely disappointing if it again is pushed into the long grass. There's been a lot of work done, actually, as Andrew, a lot of work last year, I think, and the year before, some very detailed work into the various ways it could be reformed, because it does need reforming for all sorts of reasons. And unfortunately, at the moment, it looks like it's potentially possible that that will be deferred. I mean, there was a piece of work done by the Rural Services Network I've just read the other day, which said if you had a reform, actually nearly all authorities in the country would not lose money. Many would gain money. The only areas which would lose would be inner London and outer London, but which just show that some of the opposition to this in, say, some of the metropolitan areas in England is probably a bit misplaced, because obviously they potentially could be gainers. So, I mean, I suppose what you could argue, and whether it will go anywhere, is that if there is going to be a savings regime, they should be graduated towards the those who are currently disadvantaged, and not just a straight cut across the board. But that will be, it would be very disappointing if we do not get the fair funding again, and it's yet again put back into the long grass. I think the only time it really had some sort of energy was when Rishi Sunak was local government minister, and things actually happened then. But since then, I think the steam has seemed to have gone out the boilers a bit.
Thanks. My final question, unless anybody else has got one, is really to do with, from what you've heard, what would you be saying in terms of Treasury management and the impact of, you know, okay, a 3-year deal, and it will be a tough deal in relation to long-term and short-term borrowing, whether we lend to other local authorities. Any comments on the impact of what we might call a tough settlement on Treasury management?
Well,
yeah, it's between the two of you.
yeah, it all depends on on the budget level set and so forth, the capital revenue, you know, following settlements and so forth, and they're the ones that feed through to Treasury in terms of the amount of surplus we've got to lend, and then the amount of borrowing requirement we have to do. I can, you know, we'd have to follow, wait and see what budgets look like, and how they've been settled, and and what I'm asked to do, and then a strategy will be formed based on those budget levels. So yeah, I mean, in terms of lending to other local authorities, that's all wrapped up in the Treasury investment policies that we've got, and in terms of creditworthiness and so forth. So that's not really related to a tough settlement, but it'll just impact on the numbers that we're dealing with, in my respect anyway.
Okay, do you want to add anything, Andrew?
Nothing too much to add. No, I guess the only thing to add to that is that obviously the council has in two budget sessions ago committed to its 10-year capital programme. Our medium-term plan accounts for paying for that within the period. I guess if there's anything changes, and whether that's clearly we know at the moment external factors around price increases are evident in the markets, whether they're structural or it's just a passing issue, and or whether the council decides to undertake further work in the future. But they're all things that would fit naturally into the democratic process as the council sets its budget. So my short answer would sort of build on Karen's, no as it stands at the moment, but that, you know, there are other factors that play into it over a sustained period of time. So
Okay, that's fine. Okay, can't see anybody else with their hands up. So what we're asked to do here is to note this report and to pass on any comments to Councillor Hill, who's been present all through. So I'm sure we can put something together into a note. Okay, so we're invited to note the report. Is that agreed? Yep. Yep. Hands up, please. Thanks. Great. So we'll be writing to you, Martin. Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, Karen. And Sue. Okay. So item 9, proposals for scrutiny reviews. This item sets out an evaluation of potential topics by the scrutiny committees for scrutiny reviews. And we need to agree which reviews should be undertaken by the 2 scrutiny panels, and then to decide which of the 2 are going to which of the 2 scrutiny panels. So over to Nigel West.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. You'll see from the report that the board was invited to set the topics in June, and at that meeting, this board decided instead to invite the scrutiny committees and the council to give it some more thought and come up with some ideas for these in-depth reviews. On page 77 of the report pack, you'll see the suggestions that this exercise generated, and information has been gathered from those to develop a draft terms of reference from each of the suggested topic, and that's set out in Appendix B on the report. As you know, prioritisation is the key to successful scrutiny, and that's why we've enlisted the help of colleagues from the policy unit to produce a prioritisation matrix in the context of local and national policy. And using this matrix, the policy team have come up with a sort of a prioritisation model, if you like, and it's really for the board to consider that and to select the 2 potential topics for the in-depth reviews, and any further topics from that list that you would like in the future, and to agree the terms of reference, Chairman. So it's over to the board, really.
Thanks. Emily. Yep, if I could introduce Emily McMonigal, policy advisor. You've been supporting Nigel substantially, I understand. So would you like to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. I think that Nigel has covered the majority of it in regards of the prioritisation matrix. In terms of the topics that we came up as very high, and the 2 were agricultural sector support and the town centre improvements. It was purely based on the timeliness of them and the impact that we could have. In terms of high priority, these were the family relations and the young carers, and this was mainly focused due to the impact of COVID. So we've set them out in the table in Appendix B, I think it is, yeah.
Okay. Could you say something about the scoring system? Okay. In other words, the outcome is determined by the questions asked. And I wonder how the scoring went. I mean, yes, it's very high, but what factors actually? So if we take, for example, impact on rural areas, then of course agriculture would be high. Similarly, if we'd said impact on town centres, then that would be high. But what were the factors? Deprivation indicators, populations, amount of spend, the views of the local trade councils. How could we actually see the points that each one got?
Brilliant. So they are indicated in Appendix B, Chairman,
Right.
as well. They're the overall information is all in there. In terms of the very high topics, it was mainly based on the impact that we could have in an imminent process. And that was literally it, really.
Okay. Right. Anybody who wants to comment? Sorry? Yeah, Councillor Wharton.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I would like to support the Lincolnshire agricultural sector support, and the reasons why is because agriculture in Lincolnshire is one of our most important sectors for production and the economy. And with the way we've left the EU, subsidies are going to be withdrawn, and also there is concerns over mental health issues and also the recruitment of foreign labour. Now, we are receiving £280,000 grant to Lincolnshire County Council for farmers and landowners in the Lincolnshire Wolds area for improvements. And also, I believe that without this review, and along also with the email that you received today from Vanessa Strange, supporting that call for review, that we will fall behind. So therefore, I'd like to promote that sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Yep. Hugo.
I would like to, I'll propose, or whichever, the town centre improvements. I don't know how you want to do this, whether we're all going to just propose or go round or just, I mean, just in reference to the agricultural one, I'm not 100% convinced that actually we're quite on the right target with it. And the reason, having been a farmer, and I don't need to declare an interest because I'm not one now, but central government pretty much dictates right throughout. It makes it quite clear, whether we agree or not, they really take the lead. And if you're not careful, I think it's sometimes we're perhaps maybe jumping the gun here because they haven't fully released exactly the whole game plan. And I think there is opportunity for the council to come in. I just wonder whether really right now is the time. You could say about employment, there is a thing which always they've said about the UK is that it tends to rely on cheap employment rather than actually design machinery to do the jobs to actually take it forward. So, and often what creates labour issues is actually perhaps wages aren't appropriate and people don't get the pay that they deserve. And also, of course, you've got the other thing here is we don't really have the accommodation now in the right areas where people live. So there are multiple factors. How much we can often influence that, we can keep promoting it, I wonder. But as for the town centre planning, the town plans, town high streets, well, actually, they are great opportunities to really stimulate employment. And I think there is a will here where, you know, it's how do we do it? Well, I like some of the suggestions that have been put forward in there, and the sort of thinking out the box of sort of like cookery classes if you're doing cooking, and, you know, in-store gigs if you're doing music shops. But there is an opportunity here to really sort of open up to sort of younger generations, because there's going to be a lot of shops available, relatively cheap rents, and actually there's a way in which we as a council can stimulate with grants and supports and other areas to actually stimulate. And actually, if you really look at employment, when you look at a farm, for argument's sake, you could take a 1,000-acre farm or a 2,000-acre farm, and actually what is its employment? Forget Boston for a minute, because that's vegetable lands and different. Well, you might have one person or two full-time employees. Go to a McDonald's setup, and you'll see that they employ 10 employees serving food. And they get no subsidy, but actually they're a big employer when you put it across the board. So if you take this right through, I think the high street really is very much a priority. I think we can stimulate it. It does. When you look around here and you look at Lincoln and Louth, there's some great initiatives going on, and I think we are looking at people at the minute are perhaps fed up of sort of some of the norm and looking at sort of perhaps taking different jobs and everything else because of the post-COVID. So I think it's a great time for the high street to be looked at for revamping. Thank you.
Thank you. You make a point that I want to come back to, but I think, Ray, you may have your microphone on. Okay, thanks. And it's coming back to criteria. Because if, for example, how do we compare the urban area and the rural area? And is it to do with per capita per head that we're trying to increase? Now, unless we see those figures of per capita per head to compare to, and if we were talking about savings, if one of the criteria was savings to the National Health Service, then domestic abuse would be in there. If we were talking about attendance at school, then the consequences of domestic abuse could well be higher levels. Now, the point I'm making is that we need to have some criteria that enables us. This is a qualitative study as opposed to a quantitative study. And that's what I was interested in when I asked you, have you got the quantitative figures to be able to say that this got under this score, and there may well be 20 or 30 ratings at a very low score, but it got a very high score in this. Can you help us on that?
Thank you, Chair. No, it's not something that we had a look at during the creation of this report, but it's definitely something that we can come back to and have a look at in the future and provide you with.
Okay. Right, Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Chairman. I think all the submissions have got great validity, but obviously it's unsurprisingly that I'll comment on the two relating to young people, because we do have a responsibility to young people in the county, and the impact of both of the pandemic and of social circumstances on things such as youth homelessness can't be underestimated, and particularly in the case of young carers. In a previous life, I had contact with a charity that was supporting young carers, and I was struck by the case studies of some of the things that young carers have to undertake and the impact on their lives, because they're not only caring for somebody else, they're also trying to live their own life and go to school and so on. So obviously I would speak in favour of these two as for obvious reasons, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've got a tough call here, haven't we? There's no getting away from it. You know, you could vote for all of them easily. But we have to make a choice at some point. We've got a recommendation. Anybody else want to speak? Yeah, Councillor Dilks. Sorry, who was the other?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if I declare an interest, but I'm pleased to be and honoured to be chairman of one of these scrutiny committees. I want to say it's frustrating, obviously, that we haven't been able to identify the subject so far. That's a personal frustration. I want to get on with it, you know. And I'll be happy to be guided by whatever the board decides is appropriate for us to scrutinise. But I do take the point that it's very difficult. It's very subjective, isn't it, looking through this list as to which two do you pick out. As I say, I'm happy to be guided, but you just can't really compare, you know, family relations and young carers with whether it's even town centres or the agricultural sector. It's so difficult. But what I would say is I hope that we will today actually decide on two areas that we will go into. Which two we'll do, I'll leave to other colleagues. But I would also say that the timing for these, I've noticed One of them's got a timing on it, the first one, Nigel. I think it's that we report by next April. So what I'd say is, you know, we almost need to be thinking now about the next round as well. So these that we don't pick today may well be valid for the next round. But there may be others that come up that take a higher priority before then. So what I'm saying is, let's not leave it until next April until we do this process again.
Thank you for that. Wise words. Okay. Yeah. Nigel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, public protection, they came up with a couple which they felt was important to them. Community engagement was one. The reason that was picked is I think we only had 39 respondents to a survey. When you consider the population of Lincolnshire, 750,000 odd, we thought that was pretty poor. And so that was why that one was chosen. Domestic abuse during COVID, that goes without saying. But looking at the matrix and how it's been done, I'm happy with that. One of those came out low, one came out moderate. If Councillor Wotton proposed the report, I'm happy to second that, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. One to support and one to not support. So the town centre one, I think, is so important. But I noticed looking through with the terms of reference and looking through the various the references within there, there's nothing about referring to where there's responsibilities of the local authority that have already assembled data and are working with town centre improvement. So I think that it should be looking across the piece, not just dealing with the sector itself. There's quite a bit about the town fund, but that relates to 5 towns, and we have a lot more than 5 towns, so we should be looking at how town centres are looking to survive and improve with no investment whatsoever and no likelihood of any kind of external investment, which unfortunately is a picture several are looking at. I think Councillor Marfleet was referring to the idea of a type of pop-up shop, you know, so where we're looking at young people using the town centre and being able to use it to the way that they want to use it, because town centre future is linked to demographic future as well. So, you know, you can't have a town centre just for the demographic of today. It's got to be the demographic of tomorrow. So, yeah, about how do we get young people into the town centres is vitally important. So, all that should form part of that review, I believe. So, in general, it's there, but it just needs a little bit more to it. Looking down the ones that put forward, I would suggest for anybody that knows my involvement in it, then I'd say that the waste one is a complete waste of time at the moment, because whilst you've got paper card now being separated by both Boston and NKDC, that's going to show a radical difference in the mix-up and the makeup of the recyclates. So to do a study now is actually behind the curve, and what you want is for those new stream collections to be embedded and the data that will be available in maybe 6 months to a year's time to show whether that's made any real radical change, rather than trying to do a study now which will be inconclusive. So I would suggest that shouldn't come anywhere near a review at this stage, but town centre one, I'm more than happy to support that one.
Thank you. Hugo, did you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I propose that we put the agricultural one through and the town centre planning, because you want to, don't you? So those two are both highlighted as red. And I think what I would suggest, though, is that in some sense, I think there needs to be a way in which, well, we need to sort of perhaps, whether we can put ideas forward, i.e., having looked at the agricultural one, there are things that I would actually, as being an ex-farmer, I would agree that perhaps we should just have a look, or i.e., some areas we shouldn't touch and other areas we should do, and a bit with the sort of potentially the town centre plans. So at the end of it, we've got to go out to everybody in the council to ask who, I believe, I don't know who, does anyone join, or does anybody want to sort of be called as a sort of witness to support this? Because at the end of the day, we've got 70 members here. There's quite a few sort of farmers or those that are linked in with farmers. There's quite a lot of people that use the high street. And actually, there should be a mechanism in which we sort of can sort of draw on some of the expertise within our members to sort of shape this up. Because what we really want at the end of this is 2 great documents that really help support both our rural economy and our urban economy. I mean, that's the game plan. So actually, we don't want to be that rigid that at the very beginning that we in effect go down a road and then think, wow, that wasn't quite the road. That would be my suggestion. But I think that we need to make a start, and the agriculture and the town centre is, I think, put both of them forward, and let's take it from there. Thank you.
Okay, point well made. Martin.
Just careful not to encroach on others' territory, but
thank you
just
for
some
that.
helpful suggestions, thoughts really, that coming to Councillor Dilks's point, that it does, I mean, effectively, if you choose one to report by the April, it's 6 months review. So that, by its nature, I think, will be have to be a quick one, won't it? But of course, you can have your end date whenever you like it. And coming back to Councillor Wright's point, well, some of these will need lots of conversation with partners and etc. So all I would say is that you probably need to give some thought to how long you want these, because you can have them as long as you want. It could be 18 months or whatever you like. I just feel that 6 months is quite quick. I mean, it's possible to do a quick review in 6 months, but I think you need careful thought needs to be given to that, or indeed extend it. That was all, Chairman.
Fine, thank you. We've got the recommendations here before us, and we're going to agree to two of the reviews to be undertaken by the panels, and then we're going to agree which ones they go to. And the draft terms of reference are here. But I do want to come back to the way that we look at the choice in future, because it does seem to me that I use the word that's used in academic circles, there's a difference between qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative research is what do we think about it, and quantitative is here are the numbers. And I'd be interested in us looking through the work that has already gone on into a way that we can actually score, although it may be a challenge, but I think we ought to put that challenge to our team of people to come up with something that for next time that has the potential at least to be validated by factors. And when I say factors, I mean quite simply that things matter, like number of deaths on the one hand and the number of unemployed people on the other. And okay, so if you don't include one in an appraisal, then it can deliberately skew. I don't mean that at all, but it can change the way that the balance comes out when it comes to scoring. So I think that that's something that we need to be looking at. But we're in the here and now. We've got two recommendations. I understand that they've been proposed, and I'm sure that they'll be seconded in a moment. But do we want to accept the draft terms of reference? Let's assuming that these two are going to be the ones, town centres and agriculture. Are these the terms of reference that people are happy to accept, or do we want to make any amendments? Okay. Yeah, Councillor Marfleet. Yep.
I just, in essence, with the town centre planning, perhaps the concept of actually really stimulating new business has to be a sort of key focus in there. It does sort of keep talking about tourism and hospitality, but I do think that actually the word retail and should be in there, and sort of, and in effect support. For agriculture, you know what, where the government is going about the sort of carbon neutral, green farming. That is going to be absolutely key and essential driving forward. So therefore, the whole sort of funding will be linked to that. And in effect, what we want to see is sort of, there will be huge business opportunities within agriculture, all linked around that sort of green farming and etc. So that needs to be in there, because at the end of the day, what we really want to be doing is stimulating growth within our area and be pioneers going forward. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Councillor Kendrick.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd support Councillor Marfleet's comments as regards retail as a whole, because there are some areas of the county which are not tourist hotspots, and I do think we need to sort of spread it across the county and not just concentrate on the sort of prime areas for tourism. So I'd support Councillor Marfleet's comments as regards retail in general. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks. Any more? Anybody want to comment any more? So, if we go to the topics for future scrutiny reviews, I think that we have a recommendation that we go for the question using what we've got is town centres and farming. Okay, so we should move to that proposal. Is that agreed? Indicate, please. Thank you. Thank you. And secondly, the terms of reference, as I asked a moment ago, anybody want to hint at terms of reference beyond what's been said already? We've got 2 pages on both of them. Okay. Yep, Councillor Marfleet.
Thank you. Just a comment, really, for the scrutiny reviews that haven't taken place, that we haven't looked at, the other 6 or whatever there are left, there is no reason why they can't go back to their scrutinies and be worked on as a working group or to actually put more meat on the bones and develop them to sort of come back for a scrutiny review in the future. Because there are some good ones there, but I think they perhaps want some more work done within their committees to be progressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. We've got to allocate them as well, undertaken by the scrutiny panels. Councillor Dilks, you're here, you're chair of one of the scrutiny panels. Have you got any preference?
I think Martin's guessing where I'm going here. I'm not a farmer, as you know, colleagues. I mean, I've got to say, I've got particular interest in town centres, but and as colleagues said, you know, it's we've got lots of them, haven't we? And it's not just the big towns. You know, I mean, I called in on Louth when I went to the police committee a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually encouraged by how vibrant Louth was. You know, it was a market day. But I do think there's, you know, some of the smaller towns, I'm thinking Horncastle, you know, even Spilsby and places like that, you know, I think they're the places that are perhaps need more assistance. So perhaps I'm talking myself into something here,
Thank you.
Chairman.
I noticed the plug. Thank you for that. Okay, so it looks as though Councillor Taylor, Gary Taylor, will be looking at agriculture, I think. Okay, so there we are. Can we have a vote on the whole package, that we're agreeing the topics for the future scrutiny reviews, and secondly, the draft terms of reference as set out here, subject to the final version being agreed with Tom and myself. Is that okay? Please indicate if so. That's lovely. And I think that perhaps you could take away the thoughts about getting more quantitative data for the next round of submissions. Okay, thank you for that, and thanks for the presentation. Okay, so we move on to item 10 on the agenda, Scrutiny Committee work programmes. Right. Councillor Marfleet to kick off to present a report on the work of Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee.
All good, thank you. But I will just, the one change to the printed work programme on page 103, item 3 in the list for the 20th of October, the recommissioning of carers support service is now expected on the 1st of December with an executive councillor's decision shortly afterwards. Also on the 20th of October, at the conclusion of our formal meeting, there is a 1-hour training session for the committee members on the Care Act. As this board will be aware, on the 7th of September 2021, the government published Build Back Better, our plans for health and social care. In addition to funding for the NHS to reduce its waiting list, the document includes a number of proposals for adult social care. For example, on the 20th, for October 2023, there is a plan to introduce a new £86,000 cap on the amount anyone would need to spend on their personal social care during their lifetime. When more details are published, it is expected that these will be reported to the committee. Further works will be carried out because of the impact both for residents and for this council following further release of proposals put forward. The other area which the board, our committee at the minute is going through, the agendas are made up of learning and development to bringing everybody up to speed, as well as performance monitoring and also looking at scrutiny items which are going for the executive for decision. So we are sort of operating on a three-pronged attack at the moment. It's all going very well. As you can see from the notes, that gives a brief summary of where we are and what we have done. We also discussed the concept of putting forward a scrutiny review. Our view was that with quite a few new members on, we should just have a look and see and not rush a proposal forward. However, one that we are looking at is the review of our obesity strategy. We're not looking at that. I looked at I'm involved in the food industry, and I was looking at the content and the amount of sugar that we have and consume as an individual. And actually, when you start to look at sugar, sugar is perhaps the #1 thing that really causes obesity. And actually, the food and the way we eat it and what's in it and the sugar makeup in some things is quite horrendous. So I analysed myself, and by the time I'd finished breakfast, I had absolutely gone over my sugar quota for the day. And actually, I thought I was being incredibly healthy, drinking all my fruit shots and drinks and you name it and everything else. Having Frosties on the top of that really didn't help either. And so what we've said is, look, there is a bit of an issue here, and why not look at one individual thing, sugar, how we can really help the people of Lincolnshire. That is the question. Communication is what we have, and so what we've spoken, I've spoken to both Sue Woolley about this, because there is an obesity working group linked in with the Health and Wellbeing Board. So adults is going to look at this just with the focus of sugar, but it will also link in with the Health and Wellbeing's obesity working group, and obviously back to ours. And what the plan is because it's quite complex, we want to hit masses rather than just a few. And therefore, we're going to the game plan is to sort of look at how we can and what we can do and shape it up. And then if actually it is something that needs to progress to, say, a task scrutiny review, then fair dues. But at this stage, we're looking at it to sort of see what is achievable and how we can do it. And that's sort of where we are at present with adults. Any questions?
Oh, any points that anybody wants to make in relation to what's not happening? Okay, this is our opportunity, because we're asking the question, is this a comprehensive look, scanning ahead, you know, for some months? Is there anything that we think that's important that ought to be brought to Hugo's attention? But yeah, questions of Hugo? A couple from me. You're right about sugar. A lot of people say that it's as big a problem with children, particularly at an early age. Hooked on sugar from an early age means that people develop a lifelong attachment to it. Has there any discussion gone on, or could you have some discussion with Children's Services? Because if you're doing some good work in relation to adults, then it may well be the same thing that could move over easily, transfer over easily to Children's Services. Yep.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's really about what we think about the data that comes to us about what we might call death rates and ill health rates amongst older people. And to what extent do we try to recognise changes in those death rates or seriously ill rates, that is, so that we, through people who have got mental health problems, physical disability, mental disability, that we trace the impact of our services on death and ill health rates. What I'm really asking about is that we have a population that's, okay, 750,000, of which adults covers, I would guess, I'm just picking a figure, 650 or 600,000. Do we measure the impact of combined health and adult care in relation to the way that our population is looked at?
I mean, in effect, we are looking at the different sort of, I suppose, age brackets, the way people are, their employment, everything ties in, doesn't it? So if you take, say, for argument's sake, mental health, and the previous scrutiny review talks about farmers, but actually right across the board it is identifying where the spikes are coming to, in effect, focus to reduce those spikes. And I suppose that's where the data is always that we look for, is actually how can you get the biggest win at times, because if you've got a spike coming at you, then you need to address it, don't you?
And we do that. I mean, not just by age, but also by, for example, the 7 district areas and differences between them. That's what I was interested in, to help us be what I'm going to call research focused.
Yes, I mean, everything we do is looking at all the different aspects, whether it's rural, coastal, urban. Throughout, when you map it all out, I mean, there are different scenarios right across the board for everything. Some areas are much lower, some areas are higher. And, you know, when you look at what adults does, it does focus. And when it does acknowledge that we have a hot spot, then they actually do put extra resources into that area as well.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on Hugo's report? Yeah, Phil.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We had the benefit last night, Ray will be aware as well, Councillor Wotton will be aware. Last night we had at South Kesteven a really interesting all members briefing from Professor, the head of... Yes, Yes, it is, yeah, Professor Ward, forgive me, thank you, Martin. And actually the area that he seemed to be most concerned about was in South Kesteven, but I got the impression it was across the county as well, was smoking. That the county seems to be higher, you know, have a higher incidence of smoking, and particular concern in women giving birth, you know, were still smoking. And we had a higher incidence of that than many other places, and certainly higher than average. And I just wondered if you've looked at that, and or if you want to, yeah, if you're able to.
The smoking at the minute is sort of supported by One New Lincolnshire, and in essence we appointed them. They got the contract, really, I would say it'd be 2 years ago, and it'll be basically just as we sort of launched into sort of COVID and lockdown. And they have had their own frustrations because, in effect, the whole mechanism was geared up around face-to-face visits, and then all of a sudden that whole sort of concept had to be rechanged. On the back of that, they've learnt a lot of things. There are some areas that are still not what we call ideal, where, for argument's sake, GPs aren't necessarily referring to One New Lincolnshire. The health service, we have highlighted that through, that there needs to be a better connection so that everything gets signposted to One New Lincolnshire. And that does deal with smoking and weight management as well. So, you know, they've got a good service. They are making headway. but they have had their own issues because of the fact it's been locked down. And I think, you know, we like it. It's a preventative service, and it is the way forward. And I think they've learnt a lot. And I would hope to see that we actually do start to see a bit more of a drive towards people, you know, communities. I keep promoting it. Communities, GPs actually do drive people to One New Lincolnshire. That's their job, and that's what they've got to do. And you know, at the end of the day, there's so much. I mean, you know what, smoking's always a difficult one, isn't it? You know, people do it for multiple reasons. I mean, but when you're now 10, 12 pounds a packet, I mean, it's an expensive hobby at getting on for £70 a week if you want a packet a day.
Thanks for that.
Okay.
I just wondered that One New Lincolnshire, they report into your committee regularly, do they?
Yes, we have them in, and I've sort of actually worked with them as well, sort of into our community to see how we can actually sort of learn a bit more of how they can sort of access into communities better. So yeah, they're very keen, they're very proactive, and yeah, I'd hope to see that now they get a real chance to let the reins go with both a virtual and also face-to-face now.
Okay. Nobody else wants to ask? Thank you, Hugo. That was good. Thank you. Appreciate it. Can we now turn to Carl for your report?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll take it as the paper's been read, so I'll just give a further update if that's okay.
That's lovely.
So today the local NHS is due to launch its consultation on the Lincolnshire Acute Services Review, which proposes major changes to 4 service areas. These 4 service areas are the development of a centre of excellence for orthopaedic surgery, the development of a centre of excellence for stroke services, an urgent treatment centre at Grantham Hospital in place of the current A&E department, and finally the introduction of community as well as acute medical beds at Grantham. As a key role for the committee is responding to NHS consultations, this will form a major element of the committee's work programme over the coming 4 months, with an introductory item on the 13th of October, with 2 of the 4 items considered at each of the November and December meetings. The committee has been offered an extra month by the NHS to make its response to the consultation. The committee will get the benefit of feedback to the consultation by doing it this way. This means the committee is planning to finalise its response on the 19th of January and not the 16th of December as set out on page 111. The committee will also be asked on the 13th of October to establish 1 or more working groups to consider the details of each of the 4 proposals and their rationale. Moving to other items, on the 13th of October, there is also an important item on GP services, where in addition to the Medical Director of Lincolnshire Local Medical Committee, the committee is planning to receive a report on how the CCG manages and supports GP practices. Other changes to the work programme on pages 111 include rescheduling dental services and nuclear medicine to the 10th of November, and continuing healthcare and the East Midlands ambulance services from the 10th of October to the 16th of December. I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Yep. Councillor Wotton.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Carl, as you know, I'm very disappointed that the recommendation for Grantham is the UTC Centre. 60,000 petition was sent to Downing Street over 5 years ago. We've been campaigning over 5 years. Several groups, I know when I hear this news, will be extremely disappointed, myself, my residents and my fellow councillors, county and district. Is there any possibility that in the future there may be a new or reconfigured hospital at Grantham?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Wotton. Yeah, absolutely, I share your views. It is disappointing to hear that this is the way they are likely to move forwards. I think it doesn't come as a huge surprise, realistically. after what was being said within the healthy conversation, it was felt that this would be the way they were likely to move. However, of course, the committee will have the opportunity to review what the consultation piece is and what the residents feel and build that into our response moving forward. I am aware that there has been, of course, bids for capital money from the government, and perhaps there may be reconfiguration or even the possibility of looking at a new hospital maybe going forwards, but we won't know until we get the full details of this. However, I would be hopeful to see at least some reconfiguration there.
Would you like to come back, Councillor?
Yes, please. Chairman, I'd also like to mention about GP services. I recently resigned from the Grantham Vine Street Patients Participation Group, and the reason I did, they asked me to join, there was not enough support from the public, although people complained to me, complained to colleagues about GP services waiting times being seen. For some reason, people didn't seem to want to join these groups, and so not only did I resign, but my Vice Chairman resigned as well. Is there any way that you, Carl, can encourage GPs to get more people to belong to these groups and make sure that the patients' voices are heard? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. Yeah, absolutely. The patient participation groups are incredibly important, and they are the way of feeding that voice through. I think quite often it's forgotten that these GP surgeries are often private, well, they are private businesses, and so we do need that element of feedback. They don't often push it. I have it in my own ward where I have 2 doctor surgeries. One only has an online PPG and doesn't really achieve anything, and I think it's vitally important that GPs are pressed on this. But I think it would be better from my point of view to speak to the clinical commissioning group and get them to encourage their GP practices to be more proactive in advertising to gain these volunteers to come forward.
Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Question. In relation to the problems we've had recently over the last year or so to do with COVID, I wondered to what extent does your committee look at the consequences of the NHS in Lincolnshire having to deal with COVID in relation to backlogs accruing in relation to other services, people who are on waiting lists, and to what extent can that be explained in the sense of putting it in the way that people would understand, to say that the previous figures before COVID were these, and these is what they are now, and these are the waiting times, and how do we get how are priorities given? Is it just on a time basis, or is it on a acute basis? Do we look at those sorts of indicators in holding the NHS to account?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we do look at these sort of scenarios where we've got the worst issues going on, and I know cancer care has been particularly bad and fallen behind. But of course, back in the middle of the pandemic, Grantham became a COVID site for Green, so that operations could continue, and so the backlog is very behind. It's considerably better than other areas, but it is something that is on the work programme. We have cancer care there, and we would look then at what the backlog is, and we do actively try and push with our colleagues to ensure that they're taking whatever steps they can to try and ensure that patients are receiving the treatment as soon as possible. However, acute, of course, will always be the priority until the pandemic's completely over with.
Okay, thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. And I should, before I sort of answer my question, declare a personal interest. My very close best friend from school, he lost his father due to a missing diagnosis before I asked this question. So it's obviously a personal area of interest. Is the committee able to look at instances where that's happened during COVID, where they've said, and I'll use his example of, yes, he smoked, so it didn't help, but it was a chest infection, and it wasn't a chest infection, he had cancer. They caught it, and a day later he died.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to come back. We do not look at individual cases. That's the one thing that we don't do. That's more for Health Watch. However, if we find that there is more than one case or a particular area that has these failings, we will, of course, investigate and look into that and hold those to account we need to.
Yep, Councillor Wright. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. just regards with PPGs and GP access, obviously, if you're doing scrutiny, then we need to know we're doing it in the right way, we're asking the right questions. So I would suggest that there is, I'm looking into this, or I'm actually dealing with somebody in a different forum with regards to GP access and what's happening with GP groups. So if you've got a PPG, then more often than not, they're linked to a particular practice. So they get the information on that practice and they benchmark against their own practice, not realising that another practice down the road that could even be part of the same practice group could have a totally different level of service. So the information you get from a PPG will only be linked to the practice they're looking at, which doesn't always mean that we get anything significant from it. So I would be suggesting that if we're looking at the whole PPG setup, that this should be benchmarked against either other GP groups or the GP group itself. And the reason I'm saying that is if you've got a particular, I won't name any groups because there's something going on at the moment, but you could have a group of practices and in one location, should we say one community, then you could have a GP that's fantastic, you've got online consultations, everybody's got access, it's brilliant. And yet another practice within that same group could have lots of complaints because they don't take any bookings, they don't do anything online, and yet that PPG is only used to what they're being told can be delivered by that practice. So I think rather than just go down potentially, there's a potential for a blind alley of everybody just saying they're happy through individual PPGs, is how is the PPG system itself set up? Does it actually achieve anything because individual practice information is not always accurate or even worthwhile having? So it's actually a lot more complex, I think, than just looking at, yep, there's a network of PPGs, but this isn't a network. They're just a group of PPGs. So I just would suggest that there's a potential for asking that question. Does the PPG system actually achieve what it's meant to achieve? And is there a better way of doing it?
Thank you, Chairman. We'll certainly take that on board. Of course, you do have the Care Quality Commission, which actively will speak to the PPGs. They do look at the complaints that are fed in, and of course, they all do play the role. But I think you've got a very good point there, and it's something that we would certainly look into.
Okay, yeah, Phil.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask, if I may, to Councillor Macy, clarification on following up Councillor Wotton's question about Grantham Hospital and the bids. I wasn't quite sure, the developments that you alluded to in your opening remarks, were they a response to the recent bids that have gone in, or are those bids now being considered? So if you could just clarify, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Dilks. No, certainly not. The capital bids are entirely separate to what's being progressed at the moment in time. Of course, the ASR has had other lives, and it's taken a number of years through STPs and so on to move to where we are now, but no, they're not linked realistically.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. Thank you for the reports. Yep. Moving to the recommendations, that we're asked to do two things. First of all, to look at what work has gone on since the new council started in May, and that's on page 100, 101 and 102 in relation to adults, and the same for health, and to ask ourselves, are we satisfied with the activity undertaken since June 2021? So can I have an indication that we are satisfied with the work that's already gone on by the scrutiny committees? Yep. And then secondly, looking ahead, are we satisfied with the planned work programmes of both adults and health for the foreseeable future? And they're listed from page 103 onwards. Are we happy with those? Yep. Indicate, please. Thank you. So both of those actions have been confirmed. If we now move to two information-only items, the first one relates to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Work Programme, which is on page 115. Nigel.
Yes, Chairman, this is for noting for information only.
Anything you want to bring to our attention?
Nothing has changed since this was published, Chairman. I don't believe at the next meeting, obviously, the two work programmes that we'll be looking at are children, young people and public protection.
Yep.
Sorry. Schoolboy error. Apologies, Chairman. Yes, the 28th of October, we've got the children and young people and public protection providing their scrutiny programmes. And the domestic abuse strategy is on the agenda prior to executive in November.
Okay.
And they're the two additions since our last publication. I don't know if Tracy's got anything else to add.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There's also two additional pre-decision reports on the October agenda, which is on the fleet management. So I'm just trying to find the actual titles of these reports.
Okay, thank you.
And also an IT report in relation to mobile services contract and then a fleet management decision as well. So there's two additional pre-decision scrutiny items now, Chairman.
Fine. Looking at our next meeting, which seems relatively uncluttered, as it were, I'm not saying that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. By contrast, the November meeting is significantly longer. But any comments anybody wants to make? Nope. Okay. So that's overview and scrutiny management. Invitation to a geological disposal facility working group in East and Lincolnshire. That's the next item. Nigel again.
Chairman, again, that's for noting that's a report that went to Environment and Economy scrutiny. This is really just to update the OSMB on the content.
Yeah, the point about this coming here, obviously because it's of interest, but we are, nearly everybody here is a chair of a scrutiny committee or panel, and this report actually shows the wider dynamic of how potentially the Lincolnshire, that part of Lincolnshire will be affected. So if anybody wants to make any comments, it's on its way to the executive, then we'd be happy to pass them on. It's already been to a scrutiny committee, and Councillor Wootton may want to contribute.
Thank you, Chairman. The only thing I would say that the meeting was very successful, and the reason why I believe it was successful had cross-party support, but the main thing was the engagement with the Seddlethorpe and Maplethorpe campaign group, which I engaged with them before the meeting, and also the meeting here at this council chamber, and invited speakers to speak on their behalf. And we ended the meeting with, obviously disappointed by themselves, but with them meeting outside, they thanked us and thanked Lincolnshire County Council for allowing them to engage and be part of the process. Thank you, Chairman.
So if anybody wants to speak here now, feel free. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to put on record that actually reading through it was a very good report, very well done, and Councillor Wootton's already gone through most of it. But no, commend what you did at your committee, because it can't have been easy in that situation. But no, a very good report, and happy to note it.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. Then finally, the last item under this agenda for items to note is COVID-19 update. This is another information only. If anybody, I mean, it's here so that we receive and know what's going on, because it's important that we track this, the changes that's been happening in relation to vaccinations, deaths, and we can see, like we can nationally, an improving picture. Does anybody want to make any comment? Yeah, Councillor Dilks.
I just really wondered how things are going in the schools. I just heard locally in my patch there was just with hearsay there's been quite a big outbreak in my local school, and it just sort of caused a bit of a panic on the local buses that were with children getting on, and a teacher getting on saying you all ought to wear masks and that sort of thing. And I just wondered how things were going generally, in schools.
I mean, obviously, I chair the Low Ebb Board. local outbreak engagement board, so we have monthly reports. Councillor Wright is also on that board. We do spend quite a bit of time talking about the school situation. So generally the rates are stable. They haven't have been over the summer period, and hitherto there hasn't been a spike in in total numbers across the county. That was expected when schools went back. However, you are right, in the south of the county, and South Kesterman in particular, there's quite a spike going on at the moment. The good news is that's not translating into more people being seriously ill and unfortunately dying. So those rates do remain low, and the vast majority of people who get into serious trouble are actually people who have not been vaccinated. But it's quite clear that vaccination doesn't stop you getting COVID, but it does prevent it becoming more virulent. So I think there's a steady state going on at schools at the moment, and I think in Scotland, where rates did spike because they go back to school earlier, that has now come down. So I think the current policy is to let it take its course, but at the same time do that. There is some considerable disruption, of course, to schools. Policy has changed now, where previously it was whole groups had to isolate if one person got it. That has now changed, but obviously if you're displaying symptoms or obviously have it, you have to isolate. So there is disruption, and certainly that obviously then will impact on families and on teachers as well. But yeah, it's there and it's causing problems, but at the moment I think the view is it is manageable, although difficult.
Certainly.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hale. I think we're all aware of, I hope everyone here has had the double vaccination, but I was aware of the Look North report some time ago where a gentleman had refused to take the vaccinations, and his last words in hospital were, I wish I'd had the jab. Ironic and tragic, you know.
Yep, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to pick up something slightly on what Councillor Dilk said, not that you meant anything ill by it, but when he said about, there was panic on the bus because they were told about putting the masks on and such forth. This has just been at health and well-being as well, and there's going to be something going to Lower about getting the communications back out, because double jabbing is not, the be-all and end-all. The message of hands, face and space seems to have been lost, and people are, deliberately not wearing masks in situations where they might be wiser to do so. And so, and also, as soon as we mention school children, we mention schools, and this has been discussed as well, and not places like supermarkets where they're congregating in vast numbers in the morning, which needs to be picked up on. So there is going to be a spread amongst younger people. We know that because of the reality of how many are in one enclosed space. But it's not just the schools that we should be concentrating on, and I think all members have got that in the communities, is that it's still that responsibility to speak to people and say, just think about it, because if in doubt, put a mask on if you're somewhere contained, because double jabbing will not stop you from getting it. That's proven now.
Thank you. Could I just ask a question in relation to what we call the exit strategy, the end? And we use words like normal, and not new normal, but old normal. Can you give us an indication of what the thinking of is within the Lincolnshire Resilience Forum about next year, for example, when the numbers will have gone down, but it will still be part of our life?
Okay, yeah, well, on page 153, there is a paragraph there about the LRF winding down by the end of the year. It doesn't mean to say that is a focus for the LRF will cease, but of course what's felt is that all the work will then go back to public health or education or whatever. It'll go back to the relevant police, whoever, relevant organisations, so they can treat that as business as usual. Current advice is that yes, it will continue to be there all over the winter. I mean, obviously, nobody's really sure about COVID, but assuming there are no very bad variants, which we don't know about yet at the moment, the assumption is at the moment that after the winter, then we'll get to almost a state where most people it'll just become like a flu, like a sort of background virus, which we all have to manage and live with. And just like flu, it will affect some people, and unfortunately some people will be very badly affected by it. So I think that is the current plan at the moment. They are currently rolling out, obviously, vaccinations to 12 to 15-year-olds. I think there is assumption about it won't be maybe a 50% take up or something like that. And also they're starting the third vaccination for those considered most vulnerable. So I think that's where they're going to get to. It's something there which everybody will have to manage for the foreseeable future, but there is always the risk of some variant. But at the moment, the Delta variant is the dominant one everywhere in this country, certainly, and in the world. But there's always a risk, of course, with something else could come. But at the moment, I think that's really the view where we're coming to.
You said sometime next year. I'm interested. Is the the way the world operates is that there is a normal. Are we, for example, as an employer and as an organisation, will we change? And I don't mean that to focus on Lincolnshire, but is the expectation that by and large life will go back to something similar? Because we're meeting in a different situation now, aren't we? With
I mean, I think
spatial distancing, for example. Some people still wear masks. I mean, I'm just interested in what the expectation is as we move into next year in the middle of
Well, I mean, obviously the virus is more virulent in the winter, and of course people tend to congregate indoors more in the winter. So that's where there's a feeling it will be more of a problem. But then next summer, as indeed with this summer, it will go down. I suppose the question is what happens. But I think I'll just come back to it's going to be one of those things which has to be managed. There is a concern about the flu, of course, because everybody was keeping apart last year. There's probably less resistance within all of us to the flu. Okay. So I think there's a worry about where the flu will then become a problem, and of course then we get into issues about the capacity of the NHS to deal with all of this. So I think Andrew, but our planning is that will be back to normal, and then we start talking about people, what we expect employees to do, and when they sort of return to a normal sort of hybrid system where they're sometimes in the office during the week and sometimes not. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and thanks, Chair. So work continues apace on what we're calling our Smarter Working programme in terms of, when that return to normal is in place. This broad concept of office 2 days a week, work from home 3 days a week. That's by no means a hard and fast rule. Clearly, needs of individual services and their customers is going to be paramount in terms of what those patterns and the ways of working ultimately look like. We're currently going through a process of understanding how we can change our buildings, whether that's the campus or localities, to facilitate that, and that'll take a period of time too. Decisions to be made about the best ways of doing that still to come. Clearly at the moment still a work from home where you can policy, but as those various restrictions lift and the ability for us to work in those different ways become possible, that will come, and naturally we can provide updates to this committee and other members as that progresses.
Fine, thank you. Any other thoughts, comments? No? Right. Thank you for attending the meeting. I declare the meeting closed. Safe journey home. See you next month. Thank you.